Hi everyone, this is Mr. Trio, and today we're going to be talking about paper number 1 and the first question, which is the A question. This particular question is usually framed as, what impression does the author give? One of the insights that I would like to provide is that for this type of question, you should be looking at what historians say about each of the different units which you are studying as a part of your depth studies. So throughout the time that you study these two topics for paper number 1, look at what historians say and what their impression of those sources is. This is the official marking scheme, which is a part of the curriculum book. And one of the things, I know that these can sometimes be very tedious, but the main thing that I would like to bring to your attention is that it is specifically asking about evaluation of historical interpretations. Interpretations is essentially a way of understanding what the author is trying to say. So if we look at the 5 to 6 range, students are able to answer the impression given, also analyze the author's selection and treatment of the material. This is important because if you want to get a higher mark for level 3, you have to specifically reference the extract which is provided in the exam paper. If you make no reference to the paper extract, then you'll be falling into the level 1 level for this particular question. So one of the ways to think about this particular question is by understanding that when historians write about a specific event or person, they are not randomly selecting what they are saying. They are using deliberate words. And through those words is their point of view or their impression. You should also be able to understand what the tone that the author is using, and we'll look at some examples of that. And then perhaps the most difficult concept to grasp for the A question is, what content does the author use? Or in some cases, what content does the author intentionally leave out that perhaps would go against their impression or point of view? Often students fall into the category of saying, this is a positive impression about this event, or the author is negative in their point of view of this event or person. I would ask my students to often try to go beyond just that basic positive negative. Think about if the author is trying to say, this isn't a significant event, or this event is insignificant. Often events are structured in which they retell some aspect of the history, and which you could say the author believes that this was a successful undertaking or unsuccessful. And then lastly, historians often say something along the lines of, many people misunderstand what the importance of this historical event is. So one type of impression that you could say is that the author is saying that many people misunderstand what the significance of this event is. This is a list that I was able to pick up on line. It goes over different types of tones, for everything from passionate to mocking to critical, cynical, disappointed, neutral. Once again, try to move beyond just saying something is positive or negative. So let's go over what is your specific focus for this particular question. So I would say that there are 4 main things to think about. First, this is a 6-mark question, so use your time wisely. you don't really want to spend too much time on this particular question. For example, you don't need a formal introduction and you don't need a conclusion. It's perfectly fine just to write in sentence format the basics that the question is asking you. And that would include the language, quoting directly from the source, the tone, and as I mentioned before, if there's any specific content which is popping up, which helps to create that overall impression. Another aspect which is very important is that this question is not asking you whether you agree or disagree with the author's impression. You don't have to talk about that. You don't have to provide a different impression. The author says something, I believe that the impression should be something else. That's not a requirement. You don't need to talk about that. You don't have to cross-reference this extract with anything else, such as another source or another extract. And you definitely don't have to put this impression within the larger scope of historical perspectives. That is just not required. Remember, this is a 6-mark question, so it's very basic. In fact, anyone who can read the extract well, even if they don't have much historical knowledge, should be able to answer the question. Now, I was able to find this particular extract, which I think is good, and it does relate to the Germany topic for paper number 1. But keep in mind that all of the different sections of paper number 1 for the deaf studies, the question will be phrased in exactly the same way. In this particular example, one of the things which I like to talk about is what is often described as emotional words, or words that pop out. Remember, in this particular case, Mr. Bullock is deliberately choosing words to help to bring about that impression. So, for example, in this particular example, cheated, backstairs intrigue, or unwisely help to give that overall impression of what he believes is essentially how Hitler came to power. Here are some useful phrases that you can use to make up your question. Don't try to make the response too complicated. Write directly. Say, the impression the author is given is a negative impression, a positive impression, a misunderstood impression. Be direct. The author gives a critical tone, which is supported by the phrase, in this particular case, Hitler did not seize power, he cheated into office. Remember, use the words directly from the extract in your response. And if possible, talk about the content. For example, Mr. Bullock deliberately chose not to talk about, in this case, the fact that even though Hitler lost the election, the Nazi Party becomes the largest party at that time. Why does Mr. Bullock leave that out? You could add some explanation of that, which helps to explain his impression. I hope that this is a good example for you. And as I mentioned in the previous video, look to the blue pages of the official textbooks for paper number 1 to give you more insight to how to answer the question.